Today, 19 years ago, two planes blew up the famous Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. The attack brought a paradigm shift in international politics. The vision of world affairs from a security perspective has now changed. The United Nations and its allies reoriented their foreign and defense policy. This was an effort to counter the threats they faced from various terrorist organizations, who they feared could use weapons of mass destruction. Globalization heralded the idea of porous borders, but the 9/11 incident put the idea of globalization into question. Even though the borders slowly reopened, it never returned to the pre-9/11 state. Now a different world order is unfolding slowly. Only time will tell how the restructuring will be done in the backdrop of terrorism and aggressive nationalism. rishangiSinha, Democracy News Live, New Delhi.
Unbelievable, even looking at that video again. I was not too far from it when it happened. I was slightly north of the border in Canada. I was teaching a class in Carleton University, and there was a whole class, and they were just amazed at what was going on. It was not too much later. I was moved out from there, and we went on to cover the 9/11 carnage and then its global impact around the world. But one thing that changed post 9/11 was this is never going to be the same again. Security was beefed up. One of the largest pushbacks was the idea that an armed rebellion would be allowed again. The United States kind of had a little bit of a weak situation. It tried to, tell countries, let militant groups exist, negotiate, but that changed 9/11. What also changed post 9/11 was this heavy security, systems which came into place, whether it was, looking at digital intelligence, whether it was airports, obviously, because the planes were used in bringing down those towers. And the whole idea of, what a major security paradigm shift there was. I remember Homeland Security budgets just blew out of proportion. And I think the world has changed many, many times over post 9/11. Obviously, post-COVID, we have another new paradigm shift towards health. But 19 years on, and we still fear as a global community what those two planes did to humanity, killing about 3,000 people. I'm joined by a very esteemed panel today. Joining me is Siddharth Chatterjee. He's the resident commissioner of the UN in Kenya. Colonel D.P.K. Pillai. He's a former soldier of the Indian Army, has been in many terrorist actions. He's fought a lot of terrorists. So has Siddharth as well. He was a military officer before he went on to the UN. And then Ambassador Anil Trinugayat. He's, served many years in the Middle East. Obviously served around the world. He was the Indian ambassador to Jordan, an extremely esteemed service. He's dealt with terrorism directly. So I welcome you all to the show. Let me first start with Ambassador Trinugayat. Ambassador, tell us, what is the kind of paradigm shift you saw post 9/11?
Thank you, Rohit, for having me on your show. It's always a great pleasure. In fact, now we have 19 years to that horrible incident that one could never even imagine could have happened. I remember when I was posted as State Commissioner to New York, the first place I went to was the Twin Towers for a lunch with the Merrill Lynch. But the day it happened, I was in a meeting in Moscow with their information technology minister along with my minister. And suddenly I get a SMS from my wife, and she said that the Twin Towers have been attacked. And this was something unimaginable. And whosoever I told, they could not imagine. Even the Russians were at the same time not aware of it. Then everybody started finding out. It was the most horrible thing that could have happened. But I would like to say that India, for example, had suffered from cross-border terrorism for a very long time before that. And we have been trying to tell the Americans and the rest of the world that there is a big problem and we need to look at the terrorism as terrorism and not as some kind of different definitions that they continue to give. But the 9/11 changed that paradigm because it hit the symbols of United States, symbols of liberty, symbols of finance, symbols of freedom. And therefore, the Americans took the extreme action of course, going and attacking the Taliban and Al Qaeda and all that in Afghanistan. And the war continues. And today, the same Taliban, which was initially they had spawned to bring about, to fight the Soviets, they fought against them. And today they are again working with them to bring about some kind of a peace in Afghanistan and so that they can have an honorable exit from there. In the process, the terrorism has continued to expand multifold all over the world. And it is the number one challenge for any civilized society and the country. Unfortunately, as my friend from the UN, Siddharth, will tell you, that the United Nations has not even been able to define or agree to a definition of what terrorism is all about. We all suffer from it. That is one. India has been working on it for quite some time to bring about the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. It has not met with great success, even though today there are more and more people beginning to support that. So
Right.
terrorism has been continuing and supported by various regimes across the world. And one way or the other, I think that the bigger powers are also responsible for it.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
and
No,
I
absolutely.
think that,
Absolutely. No, and I take your point. Obviously, one thing which changed post 9/11 was there was not open acceptance to the armed rebellion. There was tremendous amount of weapons being provided by multiple countries to terrorist groups. That stopped as official state policy. US couldn't go out and say that we funded this group of terrorists with these guns to go and fight this other regime. That really changed. It could not be done overtly. I'm sure covertly still must have been going on, but pre 9/11, US could go out and say we armed them with, RPGs and some guns and missiles and things like that. That just stopped. And I think one of the things that turned the tide, I was very much into, covering active war at that time. And so I got deployed to Afghanistan right after 9/11 as well. I was in northern Afghanistan, and pre 9/11, I used to live in Kandahar for a while. One thing was clear, that it was not going to be allowed, and the amount of action the US took in taking down the terrorism infrastructure was tremendous. Obviously, they're right now boxed back into Afghanistan. Let me bring in Siddharth Chatterjee. Sid, you've fought the war in Sri Lanka as well. You were at the IPKF, you were in the forefronts. And now you've been at the UN for many years. You've done multiple postings. In fact, one of the first gigs you went in with the UN was all related to terrorism and, pretty violent areas. Explain to me the kind of change that you've seen post 9/11 in the whole, outlook of the world towards terrorism and armed conflict. I can't hear you for some reason. I can't hear you, Sid. I can't hear you. Today we've had some very, difficult time with getting in a video connection in. Let me get your audio back up. Until then, DPK, can you, Colonel Pillai, can you answer that question for me? But let's get Mr. Chatterjee's audio up going soon.
The world did definitely undergo a great change after 9/11, and it was no longer a war that was confined to geographical boundaries. And while I partially agree with your that they stopped arming terrorists, but it is nonetheless what you see what happened in Iraq, where they created a demon called the ISIS. So I don't really think that whether they've really stopped arming terrorists or not. But I would like to give it to you from a very Indian perspective. Like understanding after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and how Pakistan came about to play a great role in fighting the proxy war for the Americans and leading to the collapse of the Soviet Union, they've turned their attention towards India. Now, Pakistan had learned its lessons well, and they unleashed an operation called Operation Tupac on Indians and then tried to wrest Kashmir and bleed India by 1,000 cuts. Now, our pleas for international support, and then finally our nuclear isolation following a nuclear blast of 1998. There was a complete change, but this 9/11 changed a lot. I'm not. I'm giving you a very geopolitical view from an Indian perspective, where you understand that 9/11 changed quite a bit for us. Firstly, it ended our isolation, and secondly, the proxy war that was unleashed on India was kind of exposed. Now, India was amongst the first countries that allowed military intervention that actually supported along with Israel, if you'd see, and Pakistan was a bit slow. And then when they understood that the Indians were quick on the draw, then Musharraf, that famous dialogue, you're either with us or you're against us. And then when Musharraf agreed to provide them intelligence and all other kinds of support, and he also, learned to make a profit out of it. He was, they were the recipients of a military aid. Even Pakistan, which was discarded after the end of the Soviet Union and the isolation after the nuclear blast, suddenly found itself an important ally in the war, and they made a huge profit. And it was actually intriguing for India to find that India was the Americans were actually cozying up to the Pakistanis, who were the root cause of all the issues that had happened there. But nonetheless, we did support, and our stand was vindicated when Osama bin Laden was captured by killed in the Abbottabad, which is like an equivalent of Sandhurst, or probably
An NDA,
like
National Defense Academy, Pune.
so. Yeah, so the fact is that, but I wouldn't agree fully that the Americans have stopped funding terror groups, and they do that, and we've seen that happening in Iraq and Syria and Yemen. So on that part,
Right.
I'd like to see.
Okay. Let me go back to Mr. Chatterjee. Mr. Chatterjee, what's your sense? Do you think the world has stopped looking at terrorism with the same leniency it saw earlier? No. Okay. Yeah, something changed. No, it's not coming through. All right, we have a problem with our it's a technical issue with getting a guest like Mr. Chatterjee would have been a lovely thing, but Mr. Chatterjee, we'll have to wait to get you on again. Apologies for this, but thank you very much for making the effort. Thank you. So one of the things I think we saw was that the world order changed. Getting in and out of the airport become an entirely different ball game. The cost of actually doing business, traveling globally, changed. Mr. Trinugayat, tell us a bit about your experience post 9/11. How much do you think we had to invest around the world in bringing back, international travel going again properly?
Well, the problem, Rohit, is that it went on from one extreme to another, especially in the United States and Western countries. And they started attacking or probably just cornering one community. And that has caused a multiplication, in my view, of the problem. I mean, instead of solving it, it has created bigger problem. Even though the United States did not have very many cases since 9/11, but it has not, as Kannapillai also said, has not prevented it. It is extremely difficult to travel these days. I mean, the kind of checks, the physical checks that you have to go through, sometimes they are very intrusive, and there has been a sort of protectionism of borders. I mean, and now which has been further compounded by this COVID. And so what I'm seeing is, in the general interaction, instead of fighting the root cause, they are fighting just simply the sort of result or the symptom. I mean, and that is why it is going nowhere. And then the we are seeing that terrorism has actually compounded far more, and we have seen the worst of its transformation into the ISIS. And the ISIS was actually created by several countries. It was not sui generis that it happened. And therefore, as long as the political, I was ambassador to Libya immediately after Gaddafi died, and you can imagine the continued problem from 2011 onwards in this country. Now, almost a decade later, the country continues to produce the large number of militants and extremists, all kinds of extremists, and they are being supported by all these major powers militarily, and they are being provided with the largest and the best equipment possible, and they are being provided of total protection and assistance rather than fighting them. Instead, there you are seeing the fight, whether it is in Syria, Lebanon, or Yemen, or Libya. We are seeing that they are being supported by one group or the other group. So it has become far more problematic. Of course, it is good to be cautious because you can't be. I mean, better to be safe than sorry, as they say. So I know all the governments have used more and more safety and security procedures. The detailed procedures have been earlier. I remember, I mean, when we used to fly with Air India, and I worked with Air India at one time, we did not have the cabins of the pilots logged in, or flight deck logged in, or something like that. Today there is all kinds of, you might have marshals traveling on the flight. So there is a continuous sense of fear that has generated with this, because this is the problem with the terrorist groups, because they have really nothing much to lose, and the rest of the civilized world had much to lose, and so they want to take advantage of that fear psychosis that they create by their individual, especially the bull warrior kind of thing. Apart from multiple groups that are being coming, and Colonel Pillai talked about Pakistan, which is the haven of terrorists, and there are 40 or 50 groups they have already admitted to the United Nations also. So this problem is going to continue as long as all the international community does not agree that yes, thus far and no further, and each one on the same page. And that is the biggest problem that is continuing, and this is, everybody is suffering. Of course, the I believe that that problem remains. Then the cyber security becomes another problem, and as you know, the ISIS use the social media and the latest gadgetry and the technology to the best of their advantage. So this is a problem that is a multi-pronged effort that needs to be done and undertaken at all levels.
One of those challenges of a lot of countries doing double speak, like Colonel Pillai talked about, the Americans didn't really learn even from 9/11. That is what he's saying. They continue to fund, when it came down to Gaddafi, when it came down to Iraq, when it came down to Syria. So they didn't entirely learn. But because when governments do this double speak, countries continue suffering. What we've seen is a global crisis for no reason at all, really, because of a few people taking a few planes, and now the whole world order has changed. It's made travel so much more difficult. And thanks to COVID this time, we are still, further complex situation around, travel. Now, moving forward, Colonel Pillai, what do you think else that changed post 9/11 can be brought back to normalcy? Or do we have to continue on this journey of this highly secured existence, so much security? And is there something that we can do to actually make it a better world?
I really don't think we can turn the clock back on what's happened, because firstly, the world changed on that 19 years ago. Firstly, like Ambassador brought out, and you also said, the Muslims became a target. There were not many hate crimes against the Muslims, and they became targeted. And that groups, Islamist jihadist groups, have actually proliferated in the period from then, because the kind of targeting the Americans did against Islamic communities in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and other places kind of created a grievance. And they in fact created a Shia-Sunni divide in a country like Iraq, and and then it's only festered, and it's only grown further with each passing day. And secondly, like you already brought it out, that the travel larger, many issues related to travel and safety regulations, and it's become expensive in terms of the security measures that have been put in place.
Right.
And the surveillance has increased in great measure. And it's not only in America that you had the Patriot Act or the Intelligence Surveillance Act that allows people to be put under surveillance. We've also had those kind of acts, and we've had And the world, what
You
we
bring
had
out
in
a very good
2001 is
point.
not the world
Let
that
me
you have in
let me help you
2020.
extrapolate that, Colonel Pillay. So when Colonel Pillay talks about surveillance, what happened was a lot of the privacy was lost. When people had to be surveilled, governments had to take a lot of clearances. But because of 9/11, a lot of that changed. The government was able to use, security, terrorism threat as an issue and go straight into your computers, pick out your information, record you. And I think that became a huge challenge for especially people who believe in the democracy, people who believe in the idea of privacy. And surveillance is something that's a very, very important one. Um, Colonel Pillay, do you want to now talk a bit about how was surveillance changed? And, in the light of Edward Snowden and all of those other people who then wanted to push back on the breach of privacy, and then they were sidelined by the government, do you think there was more than what met the eye? Was that much of surveillance required? We can't hear your audio. Colonel Pillay, we've lost your audio, sir. Mr. Trinugat, let me bring you in here.
Yeah,
Colonel Pillay's audio
yeah.
is still. Do you think surveillance was overdone? Do you think that much of surveillance was required post 9/11, or do you think the government used it?
Well, I think that at that time, especially in the United States, because it had not seen something like that before, it took upon itself completely, and the Homeland Security virtually, invaded the complete privacy. And in the beginning, since the nations were in shock, essentially, especially in the US, the citizens, they accepted it also. But then it has, with the growth in artificial intelligence and with the surveillance that is happening all over, I think that this has increased far more. And today it is extremely difficult to even go back on this for the country. I don't know if they are able to process all this information in a way that it is required. But frankly, I mean, I remember in India when the phones of one of the ministers were tapped, it created this big furor. But today, I think this has become a routine. Now today you have this app, so whenever for for the for tracking the virus, and many people would be telling that this is being a surveillance of sorts, but this surveillance is for your own safety. Now, so there is a small gap, and I think that divide is becoming thin day by day as to how much surveillance is necessary for the state. And I believe that the question of fundamental right to freedom, all that are coming in direct contrast and conflict with the state power. And frankly, even it happened with the terrorist activities and the kind of terrorism we saw, and it is happening more so now, and it will happen even after this when the COVID happens. So you will see that this is going to, in fact, increase the surveillance, increase the state power by a great margin across the world.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things, Mr. Trinugat. What is going to happen is that we are going to require the contact tracing for every citizen, really. And that's what's going to be an important, journey going ahead. Now, that data can be misused if governments don't have solid, data protection laws in place. And just in the last few months, we saw a possible breach of Aadhaar data when drones were used and 7,000 tickets were issued. I know the government went back and said, no, we hadn't used Aadhaar data. In fact, they were backing off from it. But, a lot of people inside are telling us that Aadhaar data was used. And so are you going to use face recognition software, which is actually meant for an entirely different task and you're not allowed to use it? Are you going to use the contact tracing data on where you were physically and whether you were wearing the devices that you're supposed to be wearing for your own protection? And I think this is where that fine balance is going to come, even though the world has changed, but data protection and privacy data must be kept for the reasons it's taken and not for everything else. Colonel Pillay, I hope your audio is back. What is your sense in the post 9/11 world and then post COVID world now? Is how much importance do we need to give to data protection?
No, well, I personally see I come from a very different establishment, and I would, while I wouldn't really advocate for intrusion into the personal spaces, and I would like to value and respect that. But for the collective good of the community, I think we are in our country particularly, we are tending to over amplify the dangers posed by data leaks and breaches. While measures should be in place, I don't agree with this kind of the kind of like, I'll just give you a comparison that in our own country, while I wouldn't go into what the American models are, and I wouldn't like to go about Edward Snowden's and other issues about those, but like in our country, we're not hesitant about giving our biometrics to get our visas to America, or to go to England, or to the United Kingdom. But when it comes to sharing the same thing, it becomes a data breach and other things. You wouldn't mind sharing your thing to use an iPhone, where you wouldn't mind storing your fingerprints and other things with those companies, or you log in with the gaming systems and you don't mind giving it. But when the government needs it, then there is a certain amount of problem. Now, while for many of these advocates of this thing, I come from a security establishment, and I understand the requirement why would any government would have to. And I think the key here lies to put the government in check, because the government shouldn't become larger than the people. They should, as long as this data is used to serve the people and protect the people at the larger number of, like, for the common good of everyone, I think they are well within the rights to enact laws that are capable of actually using your data for.
With you.
So
With
this is
you.
my
And
view. I'm
no,
sorry.
you're
It
absolutely
doesn't go
right.
with the public.
No. I think you're absolutely right, Deepika, that data should be accessed, but its misuse is where that balance needs to come. It cannot get larger than life. And I think when we talk about data protection, that's what we're talking about. It's not as if they shouldn't have your fingerprint, or they shouldn't have your retinal scan. They should have all of it. But misuse of that data for purposes other than what it was supposed to be captured for, and it's documented, that use in itself is going to become a challenge. Let's say they need to have, for the government of Singapore used a device to capture people who were coming into the country and the contact tracing. They went in very early on. In fact, I had a very senior military officer reach out to me asking me about the device and how they wanted to make sure that the next few weeks we knew where that individual had been, or is that individual developing a certain amount of is a condition where he could be possibly, or she could be possibly COVID positive. So I think those are important, but then the use has to be determined and the misuse cannot happen. The misuse should be dealt with 20 years in jail for somebody even tries doing it. And I think those are the kind of things we are talking about. Guys, I want to really thank you for weighing in 19 years on post 9/11 world. I think we have a brand new world order. Mr. Trenugai, thank you very much for joining me. Colonel Deepika Pillai, thank you for joining us. And I know we had a little bit of a technical challenge today, but I thank you for your patience. The world has changed, but what we have to do is we have to be responsible, and we have to make sure that we have a world that's still easy to function, where people can still trust you as a country, as a nation, and people can still trust the government. It shouldn't be that the government becomes so overarchingly strong that it begins crushing the freedoms of the people. Thank you for joining me on Democracy Live. It matters, and good night and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.